On August 18, 2006, I passed away for the first time. There was nothing comforting or expected about this passing. The random act of violence was all that it took to end my life. This appeared out of thin air. After a long day at the office, we decided to unwind with a few beers at the local watering hole. To call the bartender's attention because it was my turn to buy beverages. I took a blow to the side. I believed I'd been punched in the face, but then I felt the warmth and saw the blood gushing quickly down my shirt. There and then, I knew for sure that I had been stabbed. It wasn't even painful, as far as I can recall. Nonetheless, I was unable to keep my balance, and I fell to the ground. Even back then, I was more concerned with not destroying my costly suit than I was with the possibility that I would die. Death has a funny way of doing that. To each their own, I suppose. We all fancy ourselves the odd man out, the one who will ultimately triumph over whatever calamity fate has thrown their way. At least, that's what I thought as my strength and vitality dwindled away. Everything around me went dark, and the next thing I knew, I was dead. Finally, there was nothing left. For a while, there wasn't much beyond the darkness, with some eerie silhouettes and hues out in the distance. As my awareness returned, I found myself being carried into another realm, one devoid of all pain, sorrow, and death. Only travelers with varied ends in sight could be seen. I didn't sure if they were all dead like me or if they just hadn't been born yet. All I knew was that my fear had been lifted. All my concerns, anxieties, and apprehensions were now in the past. Far, far away, a light suddenly appeared. In my little life, I knew that was where I was meant to end up. I was never able to make it that far. I awoke in my own bed, drenched in perspiration and trembling uncontrollably. My hand reflexively pressed against my side, as if to cover a wound that no longer existed. As a matter of fact, I wasn't even scratched. Maybe it was all a dream. An alert appeared on my nightstand phone. When I finally checked it, I found that I had missed a number of calls and dozens of text messages. "We are at a bar right now, man. You going to make it or what?" A message from 9:43 p.m. was the first one to be read. Someone should say, "Hey, Rick, where the hell are you?" A reply to the second communication, received at 10:23 p.m. After that, there were a few phone calls and another message. "Perhaps you were lucky, or perhaps you dozed off. Never mind, I'll have another drink to toast you. As the saying goes, happy birthday, Rick." Then I received almost 20 phone calls, but only one message that made my skin crawl. "Please, for the love of God, answer the phone. It seems like something terrible occurred to Danny." I returned the call right away. My hands were shaking as I typed, both from nervousness and from the trauma of the previous night. Even if it had all been a bad dream, I knew I was among my pals in the bar. After 3 rings, Jake finally answered the phone. "Rick, are you there? That's the last I heard from you." In a frantic, weary tone, Jake questioned. The words I don't know what occurred echoed through my head. Perhaps I dozed off? What I said was somewhere between a question and a statement. Jake said, "Danny got stabbed last night," without waiting for me to finish explaining what happened. "Stabbed? How?" "I don't have a clue. Someone with a mental illness simply strolled up to him and stabbed him in the side." In a state of disbelief, I almost misplaced my phone. Like me, Danny had been attacked in the same spot. Despite the fact that I was having a million different ideas at once, worry soon became my primary concern. Inquiring minds want to know, is he okay? His procedure is ongoing. Wait, here comes his wife, they're simply telling her. Jake set down his phone, but I could still make out their muted conversation. The tone of Danny's wife's voice suggested distress, but the words escaped me. "Jake?" I made an inquiry. "He's dead, I'm afraid. Sad to say, Danny has passed away." Information became hazy and disorganized in the following seconds. We had all grown up with Danny, and suddenly he was gone. The killer didn't even leave the bar. One of the customers shot him as he allegedly went after another patron. Nonetheless, I couldn't shake the notion that I was fated to die that night. Time kept ticking away without any clarity on what had transpired. As they struggled to cope with Danny's death, some of our coworkers eventually left the company. Honestly, I could not have blamed them for wanting space, as I felt the same way. They wouldn't have benefited from hearing about my experience that night, so I didn't bother telling them. After a year had passed, I had lost contact with all of my pals. After Danny's passing, life began to return to a sense of normalcy for me, but that would all end on August 18, 2007. The annual occurrence of my birthday had arrived, and this time I had no plans to celebrate. Instead of going to work, I stayed home with a bottle of whiskey and played video games all day. It was almost sunset before I realized I was almost out of wine. The booze had affected me severely, despite the fact that I am a rather substantial guy. I went to bed at 9 o'clock, expecting to wake up with a terrible hangover. Just after midnight, I heard the front door slam open, followed by the sound of footsteps and muffled conversation. Still feeling sleepy from the drink, I attempted to stand up. I managed to get one foot out of bed before tripping and falling flat on my face. The resulting explosion was loud enough to scare away any would-be burglars. "Didn't you say no one would be at home?" A man's angry proclamation. "Don't fret, I'll handle it on my own." The sound of approaching feet came closer to me. After trying to secure the door, I was knocked to the ground as they kicked it open. My door was suddenly opened by a masked man carrying a rifle. He said one word to me, pointed the gun at me, and pulled the trigger. "You should have been more reserved." It's too bad the guy had a terrible aim. The blow he meant for my head landed squarely on my throat. There I was, struggling for air as I lay in a pool of my own blood. I had no method of getting away, even by crawling, and no means of getting aid. On my own birthday, I collapsed and died on the floor of my bedroom, exactly as I did a year before. As my last breath left my body and the excruciating anguish subsided, I was instantly transported back to the hereafter. Similarly, I traversed a bright alternate universe that hung on the cusp of our own. As they went by, I loved the variety of shapes and colors. I noticed a tree off in the distance whose branches seemed to go on forever away from the main trunk. Each limb dangled a person who existed somewhere else but not here. But even though seeing them was high on my agenda, I wasn't actually headed there. Given that, as in the past, I would find myself safe and sound in my own bed the following morning. I had an overwhelming sense of dread as my phone rang. Although I still couldn't fully believe it, I was beginning to accept the idea that my replacement after death would be someone else. "Hello?" Saying, "Rick, it's Dad. Your mom. She died last night, she was." It caused a lump to form in my throat. As expected, my next question was inevitable. That's not right. They say it was a botched burglary attempt." "I dunno, I was up late at the office. I really regret not going." From that, the conversation fizzled off. My father was so disturbed that he could hardly speak. To him, it was his own fault that he wasn't there, but I knew better. In this case, the buck stops with me. He went into a severe despair that lasted for the next 2 months. He had just lost the one person he loved most, and I couldn't blame him for being devastated. I decided to move in with him to support him as he rebuilt his life. He put up a brave front, doing what he could to keep the ship afloat, but I could tell he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown inside. You'll hear this: I wish I could say I was there. A lot. That's not your fault, Dad. You, too, could be dead if you hadn't been there. In other words, you don't know that. But I was aware of it, because the robbers were not meant to come to my parents' house. They intended to eliminate me. It was imperative that I tell him the truth. But of course not. The secret tormented me for a half a year. Even after everything that had taken place, I was at a loss for words. Nonetheless, I resolved to reveal my curse to the world. "We need to have a conversation with you, Dad." "What's up with that?" Concernedly, he asked the question. Since he knew me so well, he realized I was carrying around a lot of emotional baggage. First, I went into excruciating detail about my first passing. All the details, down to the location of the stab wound, matched up with what the witnesses at the pub that night had seen. I told him I was sorry Danny had to die instead of me. A healthy dose of skepticism was warranted on his part. My mother, however, was the subject of my disclosure. I didn't hold back. I told him exactly where I was shot, how the door had been broken into, and that there were 2 thieves present. To a T, every detail was a match. Dad, I apologize so much. In this case, the buck stops with me. I murdered her. He remained silent as he thought about what I had just said. It wasn't your fault, they said. To put it mildly, I was lost. There was no hostility in his voice, simply profound sympathy. Why would you say such a thing? No one would have minded if she hadn't passed away. He gave some serious consideration to what he was going to say next. You haven't done anything wrong, Rick. It's not your fault that this stuff happened to you, you were just going about your day. You are not to blame for what is done to you, I have no idea why or how you were brought back. And you believe me? I made an inquiry. He agreed, and gave me a bear hug. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone else understood what was happening to me. If this happens again, what then? We'll make it through it together if that happens. Even when my next birthday came along, he was true to his word. The manner of that demise was less dramatic. I shattered my neck after falling while showering. How fucking cliché. Was the last thing I thought before I left this planet for the 3rd time. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed. I yelled for my father, checking to see whether he was still alive and scared by the thought that he might have been substituted for me. I was having trouble breathing when he rushed to my side, concerned about what might have happened. My neck was broken. But I think I'm doing okay. It took me a bit to figure out who had replaced me at that point. My heart shattered when I learned that my employer had passed away. I'd never encountered a more generous soul, and like me, he'd fractured his neck in a fall. For him, that was the last straw. It wasn't a premonition or a freak occurrence that I could easily dismiss. I made up my mind right then that I couldn't handle the weight of that duty. If I had to sacrifice my life to stop it, that's what I had to do. I reasoned that if I decided to end my own life on a day other than my birthday, I might be able to save the needless passing of others. The first thing I did was write a long letter to my dad, explaining my decision to leave. Facing him in person was out of the question because I anticipated that he would try to dissuade me from taking the necessary action. It was impossible for me to bear the thought of anyone else having to sacrifice themselves for me again. Sad to say, destiny is capricious. In spite of my best efforts, I was unable to take my own life. The rope snapped as I tried to hang myself. Then I attempted suicide by gunshot, but the weapon malfunctioned. When it didn't work, I tried crashing my car into a tree, but miraculously, I survived that, too. I had no choice except to wait until my next birthday and then have someone else die in my stead. No matter how exhausted I became, I was immune to death. Destiny had me as a captive, and it was killing me. I was struck by an intoxicated motorist in 2009. So my girlfriend stood in for me. It was in 2010 that I tragically passed away due to drowning. Unfortunately, my neighbor in kindness had to see that tragedy. A brain aneurysm took my life in 2011, and it also took the life of my aunt. And the list goes on and on and on. I would die once a year, and someone in my life would take my place. The odds were always against me, no matter how hard I tried to escape. Over the course of those years, I would die 14 times before August 18, 2019. The physicians didn't know what was wrong with me until I'd been sick for a week. Each and every blood result indicated that I was perfectly healthy, but I only seemed to be growing sicker. Both my dad and I knew the end was nigh, but we also knew I'd be dragged back. And then, right at the stroke of midnight on my birthday, my heart stopped. I was awakened in my own bed, and the illness was now only a memory. Dad? So, I put in a radio call. Zero feedback. This time I got out of bed and yelled his name. The reception I received was deafening silence. I didn't need to yell for help a third time because I realized what had taken place. I cautiously entered his room, terrified of what I expected to find. Dead, indeed. Having died recently of a heart attack. He'd replaced me, and now I couldn't help him. The memorial service seemed to fly by in a flash. The empty seats left by those who had gone before him were the only thing he noticed. Some of them had done what they wanted to do with their lives and died the way nature intended, but others were meant to continue on. Rather, they had merely substituted their own death for mine. A lot of my dad's traits have been passed on to me. I even discovered a note written just to my name among them. I could tell by the state it was in that it had been written by him a long time ago. To Richard. It's been a year since your mom went away, and it's also your birthday today. I wish she were still here, but I'm grateful to have you in my life. She would choose life for you if she could, and that's how I feel, too. Both of us are aware that there is a possibility that we will swap places in death. Never have any doubt that I would willingly lay down my life for you. You didn't ask for this bad luck, so you shouldn't feel guilty about doing the right thing and appreciating your loved ones while you still have them. Dad, I adore you. I've been trying to figure out how to get away from here ever since I read that letter. Even if my dad really wants me to stay put, I can't bear the thought that I'll always be replacing someone. I moved out of town a long time ago and now I stay in a remote cottage all by myself. It's possible that if no one cares about me anymore, people will cease dying. Well, at least until I can find out how to die and stay dead. My apologies.